Good morning, everyone. Enjoyed Nancy Lawson's keynote. It sounded pretty incredible. So we're in for a treat. Now we're going to dive into invasive plant management. My name is Ashley Studholm. I'm with the Prince William Conservation Alliance. I'll be your moderator today. I'll be doing both online and present here. And I'm very excited to introduce to you all today Gloria Medina. She has a degree in natural resource management from the University of Connecticut, and she's an ecologist from Fairfax County Park Authority and a volunteer coordinator for the Invasive Management Area Program. And we're going to do a deep dive into invasive species management. She'll do her whole presentation, and then we'll do a Q&A. I'll be monitoring some of your questions that come in virtually, so we'll kind of bounce back and forth between questions here and questions that come in there. So we are here for the hour, and I'll leave 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A. I'll give you a heads up when we're approaching that, just so you know that. So, Gloria, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you all for being here. Yeah. Would it help if I close? Yes. Well, I'm Gloria Medina. I'm with the Fairfax County Park Authority, and I work with volunteers in our invasive plant management program. So I'm originally from Connecticut. That's where I got my degree. And then I moved down here 5 years ago to work with Park Authority. How about, can you guys tell me, are you all from this area? Are you all specifically from Prince William? No?
Close.
Close?
Far.
Oh, far away?
Shenandoah.
Okay.
About here.
Okay. Anyone from Fairfax? Yeah, okay. Okay.
So we're trying to get in the door.
Oh, is it locked?
I think it's locked.
This is not work.
Oh.
No, it's okay. So just to tell you a little bit about our volunteer program, it's a community-based volunteer program. So all of our core volunteers, our long-term volunteers, they come to us and they express interest in removing invasive plants on park property, usually right behind their homes, where they notice a ton of vines or other invasive species that are encroaching on their property, and they want to know how we can help them. So what we do is we kind of train them on how to lead other volunteers to host public work days where students or other members of the community can join them to do these mass removals, or they can do Eagle Scout projects or work with corporate businesses that reach out to us for like a volunteer day instead of a work day. And so they'll go out to the parks and remove invasive plants, and then they'll bag them, and our maintenance crew will pick them up and take them to the dump where they're incinerated, as opposed to leaving them in mulch piles where they might be distributed to communities in compost piles, and then invasive seeds and root fragments can spread like that. So we have about 60 active IMA and site leaders throughout Fairfax County, and we've actually capped our volunteer program with site leaders because there's only 3 employees managing the program. One is full-time, 2 are part-time, so that's about as much as we can handle for now. And then the goal is tree preservation and habitat restoration through manual removal of invasive plants. And occasionally we get to go out to do presentations and talk to the community and schools about what we're doing. Okay. So just a few before and after pictures of what our groups do. You see in the top picture, there was these are both Eagle Scout projects, and they did this in about 4, maybe 1 or 2 4-hour sessions. And so this first scout removed the large patch of Multiflora Rose, which is now that bare patch behind them. And then the next one on the bottom did, it might be Stiltgrass. I think it might be resprouts of the Multiflora Rose. So when it comes back afterwards. And what we like to do after these removal sessions is spread a seed mix, rake it into the soil, or plant native seedlings to help keep the soil intact and also help reduce the invasives that will come back. So what are invasive species? Is everyone here familiar with invasive species? Very familiar, okay. So I'll keep it short. So what are invasive species? How to identify and manage them, and then what do you do afterwards? That's what this presentation will focus on. So some pretty common terms you hear when talking about invasive species are natives, introduced, and invasive species. So native species are naturally occurring here without any human interference. They weren't brought over intentionally or accidentally from other countries. They evolved here with predators and pathogens and other insects and animals that depend on them or that feed on them and keep their populations in check. And so introduced species are brought over, again, intentionally or accidentally from other countries. And invasive species are not necessarily always, introduced species are not always invasive. Sometimes they stay where you planted them, they're not naturalizing in the parks. But invasive species, they share these common characteristics where they do naturalize in the park, they escape cultivation, and they spread very aggressively. So these are the main invasive species characteristics that you may see in. They grow very rapidly, like kudzu can grow a couple feet in the summertime. They can spread by runners or rhizomes, their roots, and making them harder to remove or eradicate. They're prolific seed producers, so one plant can produce hundreds or thousands of seeds, just one plant. They have a longer growing season, so you'll see they'll be the first ones now in the late winter to start leafing out, and they'll be the last ones to lose their leaves in the fall. So they have this longer growing season, they can take advantage of that to spread faster, take up more space from the natives. They adapt easily to disturbance, so any form of disturbance, whether it's natural, like a flooding event, or human-based, like construction or gardening, or even removing invasive plants, disturbing that soil is going to invite more invasive plants, unfortunately. They have a broad tolerance for a different range of environmental conditions. Stiltgrass is a great example. You can find it in dry, shady understories, in full sun, wet areas, in all kinds of different conditions. Whereas our natives, we tend to have to find specific native for whatever kind of area you're trying to plant, whether it's a moist, sunny area or half shade, half sun area. So they're less tolerant to different conditions. And because they're introduced species, they don't have any natural predators. So there's usually nothing browsing on them or introducing them to diseases and keeping their populations at more manageable levels. So what are their negative impacts? Because they grow so rapidly and they're prolific seed producers and everything else they do, they can create these monocultures where they're displacing native and they're reducing the biodiversity, not just of the other plants, but also pollinators that depend on the native plants and any wildlife that depend on them for food or habitat. And they can also impact recreational activities for people. So a lot of these invasive vines that cover the tree lines like this, if there is, like Laurel Hill has a disc golf course in Lorton, and a lot of the players will complain that when they throw their discs, they go into the forest, they get eaten up by all these vines and they can't get them back. Or a lot of the invasive shrubs like Multiflora Rose and Barberry will encroach on the trails. We have a lot of trails, we can't manage them all, and so kind of lose some trails to invasive species. And then there's aquatic invasive plants like Trappa spinosa that grows similar to Pachysandra, where it creates this dense mat on the surface of water bodies, and that can entangle motorboats that are on the surface of the water.
You can keep going.
The next slide, please.
Oh, hit the next one. Yeah, I got you.
Thank you. So these are some of the most common invasive species that our volunteers focus on. An important thing that I should know is that our volunteers are only using manual removal. They're not using mechanical or any power tools or herbicide. So they're the pretty easy ones to use by hand. Does everyone know all of these?
I can't.
Yeah, go ahead, shout them out, whichever one
What is
is
the
using.
one up in that right?
The top right is Barberry.
That's part of it.
Yep.
And This purple berry.
This one? This is porcelainberry.
We can go overall for us.
Yeah, sure. So this is English ivy. This is Mile a Minute. This is bittersweet, the vine that swirls around plants and kills them. Garlic mustard right here. This is porcelainberry. Next to that is Multiflora Rose. Under that, the red berries, that's autumn olive. In the bottom corner is burning bush or winged Euonymus. Right above that is Stiltgrass, and then we have barberry. There's many more, but these are maybe the top ones we focus on. So Japanese stiltgrass. This is one of the ones that were introduced unintentionally. It was used as packing material and it just fell out of a train and the seeds spread. So it's an annual, which makes it easier to manage if it didn't spread so aggressively like this, because if you can get it before the seeds are mature and drop, you can remove that one season of seeds. Best way to identify is by the silver midrib on the leaves. And this is one of those prolific seed producers. So one plant can have up to 1,000 seeds on it. To manage it, if you have a dense understory covered like that, you need numbers. This is a great plant to get some kids out there. They just love pulling it up. It comes out super easily. If they try to yank on a native grass, they usually have deeper root systems, so they won't come up as easily. And they can just let it go. If you have the volunteer numbers, or if you yourself have a small area that you can manage, you can try to remove multiple growing seasons within one. If you start early in the summer, once it's tall enough, you can get that out of the way, and it will regrow from the seed bank, so you can get a second round out. If you can't manage, if you can't plan for 2 removal events in one summer season, what you can do is wait until right before the seeds drop or before they're produced and get them out then. If you don't want to do hand pulling, you can also mow them before the seeds are mature. And then if there are any seeds present, you want to stack them and put them with trash. Pachysandra is an evergreen ground cover vine. It grows by the roots. It does produce flowers and seeds, but we found that it most commonly spreads by the roots. And it does grow slowly, so this is a great plant to leave until the winter, where everything else has all the leaves that fall, and this one's easy to spot. And you just pull it up by the roots and bag it. So most of these invasive species were introduced intentionally either as ornamental, because they do look pleasing to the eye for some, or when they're maintained and landscaped, and also for like Pachysandra, for example, and Periwinkle were both used as erosion control plants, because they do produce really big root systems, and so they can hold the soil in place. But there are native alternatives that you can get. And then this is Periwinkle or Vinca. It's another evergreen dense monoculture vine that you can focus on in the wintertime when everything else has dropped its leaves. And it does spread by the root system, so this is another one that you want to bag all parts of the plants when you move them. Yellow Archangel is becoming a popular ornamental plant for landscaping. We see it escaping people's backyards and into the parks a lot. Our volunteers say that it's not hard to pull up, so you can pull it up by the roots, but you will have to go back for any resprouts and any new plants that grow from the seed bank. Italian Arum is another popular ornamental plant. This one is on our early detection rapid response list, so we're trying to find these and remove them before they get to be to a level where we can't eradicate them, but we'll have to only focus on managing them. But it's a perennial. It has these very large, glossy, evergreen leaves that persist through the winter and then die off in the summertime and produce similar berries to Jack in the Pulpit, which is a native plant. It can be tough to eradicate if you don't get all of the small tubers and root parts out. It'll resprout. But I've read that all parts of this plant are poisonous to people, the leaves, the roots, the berries. So make sure you wear gloves and long sleeves and you bag everything. Poisonous as in like give you a rash, like English ivy might or poison ivy. Leatherleaf Mahonia is another popular ornamental plant we see in yards and now escaping into the parks. It's an evergreen shrub. It looks very similar to holly, but it's actually in the Berberis family, which is what the Japanese barberry plant is in. Did you have a question? It has yellow flowers and that produce berries that ripen to a dark blue or purple color. Seedlings can be hand pulled, or if you have a tool like an uprooter or a polar bear, you can fit it around the base and pull it up like that. We have many invasive viburnums, but I'll just go into detail for one of them really. This is linden viburnum. They all have opposite leaves. Linden viburnum has pubescent leaves. If you rub the leaves, they feel hairy. And they also have, if you notice, the base of the leaf has two glands on the other side, so that's something else that you can look for to be more confident in your ID. It's a deciduous, multi-stemmed shrub. It can grow up to 15 feet and produces red berries. You can pull up the seedlings and cut repeated cutting over the years, or pull up the root system for the entire plant. And these are a few more other invasive viburnums. Cybold and leatherleaf viburnum are more lancelet shaped, and T viburnum and double file viburnum, or snowball viburnum is another common name for the one on the bottom. Those might be confused with the native arrowwood viburnum, but the T viburnum has, again, longer leaves, and the double file viburnum has very deep veins on the leaves.
These are all invasive too.
Yeah.
What did you say the one that wasn't?
Arrowwood viburnum, yeah. And there's also black haw viburnum and maple leaf viburnum, but they look different. You're less likely to confuse them. This is bush honeysuckle, another multi-stemmed deciduous shrub, but it has very light bark with those deep dark striations on it, so that can help you identify them even now in the wintertime when there aren't any leaves. They do have two opposite smooth leaves and white fragrant flowers and very copious red berries, which make them, again, popular ornamental plants. If you're not sure which you're cutting, you can always find a small wooden stem and cut it, and the cross section, the center will be hollow, and that's how you know you have an invasive honeysuckle bush. This one has a pretty shallow root system, so as long as the base isn't too thick, you can usually pull it out with a weed wrench or just cut it back and do repeated cuttings over time. Multiflora Rose is another popular ornamental plant, but it's also been used as a natural fencing because it has so many thorns. There's a native rose in Virginia, and the best way to tell the difference, even now in the winter where there are some leaves still hanging on, is if you look at the base of each leaf, there's a stipule. The invasive one has that fringy, hairy stipule, and the native will have two solid wings on the sides. But this one is a bush, but it can also act as a trailing vine. If it's growing next to a tree, the branches can grow up and entangle in the tree branches. Wineberry has delicious berries that you can pick and eat, but also is invasive and can overtake your meadow or forest edge. It looks very similar to blackberry or raspberry, but it has three leaves, and on the underside has a white color, and the stems are unique because they're so densely covered in fine red hairs or thorns. But they do come up really easily if you have nice big gloves to protect you from the thorns. Yeah. And these, similar to Multiflora Rose, Wineberry, they have these arching branches, and if they make contact with the soil, they can remove there. So you want to make sure to bag any parts you remove. Burning bush is another multi-stemmed invasive shrub. It has the younger stems, you might find those signature woody wings on the sides, or the more mature stems, they'll just have the scars from where the stem or the wings were left behind. But they grow similar to burning honeysuckle, where they have opposite leaves, but honeysuckle leaves have smooth edges and burning bush has small serrations on the leaves. And this is another popular ornamental plant because it has such vibrant red colors in the fall. But this is another one that's pretty shallow rooted, so you can usually pull them out of the ground pretty easily. And there is a native euonymus called strawberry bush. It grows more delicately looking than the burning bush. And whereas they both have young stems that are green in color, the mature strawberry stems remain green. This is Japanese barberry, another arching invasive shrub. It has closely growing leaves to the stems. They're not, they don't look very similar to multiflora rose. They turn this burgundy color in the fall. And they have very sharp, straight thorns on the stems and red berries that can hang on through the winter. And this has actually been linked to higher cases of Lyme disease in areas because the mice that carry the ticks that are vectors of the Lyme disease are using it as habitat. And where there are dense patches of barberry, you're most likely to find a tick and get Lyme disease. This is also another plant that's commonly used as a natural fence because of those thick thorns. And an interesting fact about it is if you pull it out of the ground, the roots are bright yellow. English ivy. So a theme with the vines is for removal is creating these windows where you cut high and you cut low, and then you just leave the vines growing on the tree. They'll dry off and die within a few months and eventually fall off. But you don't want to pull any of those vines out of the tree. You could break those branches and invite pathogens into the tree, disease. But you might also break a branch or the vines and then come down on you and you can get hurt. So just leave them. They won't look very good for a while, but eventually they'll come off and the tree will have a better chance of surviving. English ivy is a vine that it doesn't produce berries while it's growing on the ground, but once it grows up a vertical structure like a tree or a fence or the side of your house, that's when it starts producing berries. And it has two different leaf types. So the bottom corner has the juvenile leaves. They look kind of like maple leaves. And then the top corner has the mature leaves, and those are the ones that you'll see producing the berries. Another evergreen, so you can leave it the rest of the year and just focus on it in the winter. So that's easier to spot. And sometimes easier to get to when there are other invasives growing around it. This is porcelainberry, an invasive vine that looks very similar to native grapes. Some of the key ID traits are some of the porcelainberry leaves will look just like grape leaves. They're very whole, but you can also find these deeply lobed leaves like in the top corner. And if it has berries or flowers, they do have different colors like white or light pink, light blue, purple, berry colors. But a thing to know about the berries and the flowers is they grow upwards towards the sky, whereas the native grapes, they hang. So that's something to look for. The bark can look somewhat similar, but porcelainberry bark, it does have that rough texture, but it's not a peeling texture like grapevines. And also, if you find a smaller woody branch and you cut it, the center pith is white for the porcelainberry, and the native grapes have a brown pith. So when it comes to invasive species, it doesn't really matter what kind it is, if it's a grass or a vine or a shrub, there is going to be a seed bank if the plant's been there for many years. So even if you get the whole root system out, you're going to have to come back here for a couple of years to get that any resprouts from the seed bank. But don't let that discourage you. You keep at it, you can get them. Bittersweet is one of the vines that twirls around, wraps around trees and strangles them over time. Whereas porcelainberry kind of grows over the tops of them and shades them out and adds extra weight they can't support. This one will girdle them over the years, and there is a native bittersweet that's more commonly found in the coastal areas of Virginia. But if you're ever down there and you're not sure what you're working on, the best things to look for are the berries or the flowers. The berries in the invasive bittersweet have those yellow shells around them. And the native one has an orange or reddish shell, so you won't see any of that yellow color. Also, the flowers of the invasive bittersweet grows along the stems, whereas the native one only grows at the ends of the stems. And just like the other vines, just create that window and leave the vine on the tree. If you can get the roots out, get the roots out. They're bright orange. Otherwise, you can come back and do repeated cutting. Mildminute is an annual vine, so if you can get it before the seeds drop or the berries ripen, you can help reduce the seed load and over time deplete the seed bank. It is covered in very fine thorns, so you want to make sure you wear gloves and long sleeves, but otherwise it's not deeply rooted at all. It comes up really easily. You can almost roll it off of shrubs or wherever it's growing. And it has those equilateral triangular leaves, and it also has circular leaves growing that the stems grow through. It's something you can look for. And this one was actually an invasive species where a biological control was brought over, a native weevil to Asia where the mildminute is native to. And it won't eradicate the species, but you'll see it's not spreading as rapidly in the parks. It's not spreading, so they're kind of staying where they are. But if you ever notice mildminute leaves covered in little holes, look more closely and you might see the weevils. They're pretty small, but you can see them with your eyes. So these are the tools that our volunteers use. They're pretty standard garden tools. We have loppers or small clippers, folding saws that they can use to cut down shrubs or really thick vines. We give them cotton or rubber gloves, depending on if they're working on stiltgrass or garlic mustard or English ivy, and then we have thick leather gloves for when they're working on thorny bushes. And then that tool there is the weed wrench or uprooter, or Philibert are different brand names. And that's what they like to use to uproot small shrubs or small trees. There's a clamp mechanism at the base that you fit around the base of a shrub, and then you just use that long lever, lean it back, and it uproots them. And then if you are working on your own property, it's called root uprooter. Yeah, that's the one that we mentioned. And they come in different sizes. You can have a large one, medium, or a pretty small one. They're kind of heavy, but they're very useful and very popular amongst the volunteers. And then if you're working on your own property, you can use power tools. You can use a chainsaw to cut through shrubs faster, or a mower to mow down stiltgrass before it seeds. And then these are some more volunteer pictures. They can fill 3 to 20 bags. Sometimes if they have a really large group, they'll fill up to 100 bags. And then our area staff just have to go around and pick them up and take them to a dumpster. And then that picture there is of an invasive vine that a volunteer very tediously followed through without breaking, so she could get as much of it as possible. So that's a good way to try to get as much of the root system out of the ground.
Okay, I have one quick question. So these are then gonna get incinerated?
Yes.
So if we live on a farm and have our own bird piles,
Yes.
is it safe to put them in our own bird piles?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, nothing toxic in the area like that, or?
As long as it's not poison ivy, it should be
I
fine.
didn't get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what do you do after you've removed all these invasives? You want to replace them with natives. You might have to do a couple of seasons of removal to get those resprouts and to deplete the seed bank, but you can start slowly adding native trees and put protection around them and just focus on getting any of those resprouts away from them so they have a chance of survival. Or you can spread a native seed mix and have a nice wildflower come up afterwards. So we get our plants from Earth Sangha Native Wild Plant Nursery, and they're very local, eco-type. They get all their seed sources from Fairfax County Parks. So we can trust that the seedlings that we're getting from them are already from our parks. But we also get plants from Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District, Fairfax Relief, and we also get donations from Virginia Department of Forestry. And we buy our seed mixes from Ernst, if you're looking for a seed source. They have like pre-made mixes for shady or roadside or full sun meadows. You can also create your own.
Do we buy them from?
Ernst?
Where do you buy the seeds from?
It's a website called Ernst, ENRST, or ERNST.com. And these sources might be out on those tables already, but Something we like to share with our volunteers and community is a brochure made by Northern Soil and Water Conservation District. It's a plant this, not that brochure that kind of goes into basic details about what natives are, what invasives are, why we want one versus the other. And then on the other side, it actually recommends native species alternatives to the introduced invasive that you might have on your property. It's a good list, and if you want more recommendations, you can try Nova Native. They have a more detailed or longer list and more options to choose from. And then here's some more before and after pictures, so you don't feel discouraged that this is not impossible. So here we have porcelainberry growing up the trees and mylamina growing on what I believe were multiflora rose shrubs right underneath. And so the volunteers removed the mylamina and the shrubs underneath, and then they created that window where they just cut the vines above their heads or about breast height. And then, so that's what it'll look like afterwards. So invasive vines and shrubs are gone, and you just have the dead vines that are still hanging from the tree.
They eventually fall down.
They will, yeah. Here is a cautionary tale of taking on large projects. This is about 1 acre or 2 of an open full sun meadow that had stiltgrass, garlic mustard, porcelainberry, mylamina, and we had a large volunteer group. They came in, they cleared all of it and within a few hours, and then they planted natives. You can see the tree tubes in the other picture. And then unless you have large groups like that can come back to get those resprouts, if those invasives are going to come right back in. So if you have a large area like this that you know you can't keep up with on your own, start small. Do like 1/4 of an acre and focus on that until the natives have established a bit more and the seed bank has reduced, and then move on to the next one. And then kind of extend your restoration area like that. Here's mylamina growing on a forest edge where it's in full sun before and after it was removed. So in the other picture, you can see some native grasses that survived. And here's another great resource that we encourage people to use to learn about invasive species. This is the most recently updated version of Plant Invaders of the Mid-Atlantic. And it goes into more detail about all the invasives that I mentioned and many more. So it's a great resource. You can buy the book I saw on tables out there. You can also download a free PDF online. Thank you.
Thank you. That is a really great book. And we're going to kick this off. This is just a quick question from Steve online. Can the uprooter be rented locally?
That is a great question. I would reach out to small like park organizations or volunteer programs like the IME program. If you had an event and you wanted to loan one of our tools, we would just kind of free rent them out to you. We can set them outside of our supply cage and you just pick them up and drop them off when you're done with them. It's something we've done before.
Any other questions here?
I have one. The invasive management area program. You said you provide training?
Yeah, so for the site leaders, we meet with them out on the site, whatever part that they chose to kind of adopt, we'll meet with them, walk the area, and kind of help them narrow in on where to focus on. Because again, the parks are pretty big unless it's a really small pocket park. So we'll try to get them to focus on one invasive species or one area, teach them the identification skills and removal efforts and how to manage other volunteer groups. And then we'll just kind of let them set their own schedule. So they go out whenever they want.
So that's only in Fairfax County or?
That's just where I work at, Fairfax County. I think Arlington County has a similar program. I'm not sure about other counties.
And we should encourage Prince William to do that too. So if you are a Prince William resident, I think that this is a really great thing that we could be advocates for. We were successful, Janine and I were successful in advocating for native plants to be planted in county property landscapes. And we were successful in that. So I think that there are opportunities to adopt programs that are successful elsewhere and have that here.
Yeah, and again, our core volunteers are all community members that came to us because they wanted to help do something about the invasive plants.
Was asking to see the uprooter picture again. And, Gloria, when someone asks a question here, can you repeat that so that people are just going to hear it too?
Yes, yeah. So here's the uprooter. That's one brand. I think they come in white. Actually, there's the uprooter, pillar bear, and weed wrench, which may or may not be discontinued.
It's available on Amazon
Okay, there you go.
in all three sizes.
Thank you. So it's available on Amazon in different sizes. There's a large, a medium, and a small, about 1 2-foot tool.
So you have a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
Is it, from what you said, you would recommend starting with just one spot, or kind of trying to go twice?
Yeah. So the question was basically how do you prioritize what species to work on?
Yeah.
So first depending on, like, every park is different, so they might not have the same species, but what we definitely encourage everyone to focus on first are getting vines off of trees. Just creating that window, you don't have to pull the roots out first. If you have a lot of trees that are covered by vines, just create that window, kill that seed source, and go back later to get the roots out. And then you can focus on whatever is next, whether it's shrubs or ground cover. And a good way to prioritize those is when they're fruiting or when they're flowering. You can get them right before and kind of follow that timeline.
Do you ever use tarps to cover an area after you've removed to kill the sprouts? And
We have not used tarps to cover areas after we've removed invasives. We do use tarps just to pile the debris that's been removed off, and then sometimes we can get a dumpster from solid waste, and the volunteers will take the tarp, load that into the dumpster, and then solid waste will take the whole dumpster instead of doing individual bags. Especially if they have large groups, but we haven't done actual covering of, like, areas to try to smother the invasive plants.
And I answer that as a master gardener, that would also smother all the living roots underneath of the ground, so you would, not allow regrowth, but you'd also kind of kill that whole area.
Yeah.
Of anything beneficial.
I'm also a master gardener.
Okay.
very cool.
There are areas where you want to
Kill everything.
kill everything to start over if you have natives to plant.
Mm-hmm.
And a black tarp warms the soil and causes all those little seeds to sprout. They don't see the sun and they die. So the warmth and the moisture, and yeah.
And kill all
There
the
are
living
cases where you want to, for,
organisms.
yeah,
It's an experiment you can try. I know one of my volunteers tried that, I think with Pachcysandra, and she found that it was growing out of the sides. So unless you have a very large tarp where you can weigh it down.
that's
Gonna
why I
find
say
its way
after
out.
you remove them,
Right,
cover
right.
for 2 weeks to sprout weed and the other invasives, pull it off, plant your natives.
We haven't tried that technique. Any other questions?
So do you give this feedback back to Fairfax County and how many bags of this invasive stuff, like the board
Yes.
supervisors, so they can do?
They should, yes, they do see it, yeah. So our branch manager does
That's one branch.
yeah. Oh, the Natural Resources Branch, which is where the program is based out of. He does do an annual report for the Board of County Supervisors, where we also ask for more funding to get more tools for volunteers, more plants, and also more staff to support the growing program. But we do get all those stats together. We use an online recording system where Fairfax County has volunteers sign up online, and then they record their own hours. Site leaders record how many hours they're out there every day, whenever they're out there, how many bags they remove. And that's also how I know to let the park staff know that there are bags out there to pick up.
How long have you been doing this? Has this program been?
The program started in 2006.
And you see good results?
We do, yeah, it is a long-term program, so you have to stick it out for years at your site to really see those efforts. But we do have some sites that have gone into more of a maintenance mode than an operative mode, because again, it's an open air park, even if they able to get all the invasives out and they depleted the seed bank, there are birds flying overhead spreading more seeds constantly. So we do have at least, one park where the site leader started one park, got it into that maintenance mode, where she just has to go back maybe once or twice a year to get new leaf sprouts. But she also started a new park to kind of get more parks like that. So there are small parks where you can kind of make a difference. How do you get rid of Arum Arum? If you can, well, you can pull up the seedlings if they're small enough, or you can use the uprooter to get large shrubs out, or you can do repeated cutting. Just cut it, it'll resprout, and then just keep cutting it back until the roots are dead. If you are on your own property or you have permission from the property owner, you can use herbicide. So you just cut it and then apply the herbicide almost immediately to the cut stump, and that should kill it. You might have to go back if it's growing really aggressively and resprouts if it's a big one, but you see pretty good results with that.
So,
Yeah.
how can we get a site leader to come up to like a park just to give a training on?
Well, the site leaders are the ones that adopted a park, so we train them, and then they work with volunteer groups, and they're more like one-day events. So they're kind of doing like a quick spiel, saying, this is the plant we're working on, this is what it looks like, and this is how you remove it. And then they do that for like 2 to 3 hours on the weekends, sometimes on the weekdays if they're retired. So are you looking to train volunteers?
Yeah, because when we work with Matt at First Name.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's going to come out tomorrow at one of our sites. But your program came up like last week, and we're like, well, it's the first time I've heard of this program. Well, we were told it's only in Fairfax County.
Yeah.
I'm in the city of Alexandria.
Okay, cool.
So we're just like trying to figure out, when do you guys come in? And, I mean, do you train the site leaders, or do you send out a site leader?
No, so they come to us because there's a park they're interested in,
Who's they come to you?
the site leaders.
Oh,
I'm the site
so we
leader.
pick a site leader and they come to you.
They come to us, like a random person will say, there's these vines growing in the park behind my house, what can you do about it? Say, we don't have the funds to do anything about it, but we can train you on how to remove it, and you have permission to work on the park and remove plants. And then they'll do that, they'll just dedicate their personal time to remove the plants, and they'll work with other groups. So it's really people coming to us and telling us they want to do something,
Okay.
and where.
So we were under the impression that it was like a formal training that someone had to go through.
There's a couple steps, like for onboarding there, we'll do a very similar PowerPoint like this with them to go through it. We'll walk with them in the site, whatever park it is that they're interested in, so that we can both familiarize ourselves with the invasives that are there and how to manage them. And then we'll follow up with visits throughout the year.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Buffer areas around the streams. I have a problem with a riparian buffer area where apparently the Corps of Engineers many years ago planted the Japanese honeysuckle to control erosion.
Yeah.
So I have an entire stream that's lined with honeysuckle.
Right.
Have you experienced that? The advice they're giving me is take a little small square, like 5 feet by 5 feet. Clear it, plant something native there.
Yeah.
And wait until that's established. It's gonna take, I'm not gonna live long enough.
Yeah. So when our volunteers are working on stream banks or slopes where erosion could be an issue, we tell them not to pull out any roots. So maybe not working in 5 by 5, depending on what you can keep up with. You just want to cut it, leave a stump, and you can apply herbicide to kill it faster, and then plant around them. Plant native like grass plugs or spread a seed mix to help stabilize the soil. That's what we ask our volunteers to.
Herbicide at the site.
If it's a woody plant, you can apply like a very small amount with a sponge tip, so it's not spreading or getting on anything else. If it's like a grass or something like that, then just repeated cutting until the seed bank is depleted and replacing it with natives.
Are you signed up for the waterfront course that's today with Mike?
I think I am.
Okay, that would also be a good one for him too, even though that was really great. continue the discussion up there too.
Anyone?
Any other questions? Gloria, thank you so much for sharing all of that. Yeah, we, next is lunch, and so lunch goes from, 12:30 to 1:30, and then we'll move on to our breakout session 2, and enjoy.